Tonight, before you close your eyes, I want to ask you something. How was your day? Did someone's words cut you deeper than they should have? Did something go wrong that you never saw coming? Or perhaps you simply felt heavy without knowing quite why. 2,300 years ago, a young slave boy on the streets of Rome carried the same weight. He had no freedom. His master could do with him as he wished. And one day, the story goes, that master began to twist the boy's leg slowly, deliberately. Perhaps even with a kind of casual cruelty, as though testing the limits of another person's endurance. The boy looked up at him and said, quietly, "That will break." The master did not stop. It broke. And the boy said, simply, "I told you so." That boy's name was Epictetus. He would go on to become one of the most influential philosophers in the history of Western thought. The teacher of emperors, the voice that echoed across centuries. And far across the empire, in a candlelit room within one of the most powerful palaces the world has ever known, the emperor himself was writing. Not proclamations. Not military orders. A diary. A private conversation with himself, in which he asked, night after night, was I a good man today? Did I act with virtue? Did I let my anger rule me, or did I rule it? That emperor's name was Marcus Aurelius. The diary he kept, never intended for anyone else's eyes, became one of humanity's most treasured books. We know it today as the Meditations. Here is what strikes me about these two men. One was a slave. One was an emperor. One owned nothing. One owned everything. And yet they were asking the same questions, walking the same path, guided by the same philosophy. That philosophy is Stoicism. Tonight, we are going to walk that path together. Through the ancient ports of the Mediterranean. Through the slave quarters of Rome and the war camps of the Danube frontier. Through a system of thought that asks us, quietly and without flinching, to look at what we cannot control and let it go. This is not a story about being cold, or unfeeling, or indifferent. It is a story about something far more radical than that: the possibility of genuine freedom, even in the worst of circumstances. Make yourself comfortable. This is a long story. And it begins, as so many things do, at the edge of the sea. Imagine the Mediterranean in the 3rd century before the Common Era. It is not the tranquil blue of a vacation postcard. It is loud and salt-crusted and constantly in motion. Ships loaded with grain, olive oil, and pottery creak against their moorings. Merchants argue in a dozen languages. The smell of fish and tar and wood smoke mixes with something else, a kind of unease. A vibration in the air that tells you the world is shifting. For centuries, the Greek world had been organized around the polis, the city-state. Athens, Sparta, Corinth. Each city was its own universe, with its own gods, its own laws, its own identity. A Greek citizen knew who he was because he knew where he was from. The city gave him his name, his meaning, his place in the cosmos. And then Alexander happened. Within a decade, Alexander the Great had swept across an empire stretching from Greece to Egypt to the borders of India. By the time he died at 32 in Babylon, likely from fever, he had remade the world. Not just politically, but existentially. The old boundaries were gone. The old identities had been dissolved into something vast and unmapped. A Greek from Athens might now find himself living in Alexandria, in Egypt, or Persepolis, in Persia. The polis, the home that gave life its structure, was no longer enough. People were suddenly adrift in a much larger world. And adrift people ask the oldest questions with a new urgency. Who am I? What should I do? How should I live? How do I remain myself when the ground beneath me keeps changing? The philosophers of the Hellenistic age were born from this anxiety. Epicurus offered the pursuit of quiet pleasure and the avoidance of pain. The skeptics said suspend all judgment, for nothing can be known for certain. And around 300 BCE, in Athens, a man from the island of Cyprus climbed the steps of a painted porch, a stoa, in Greek, and began to teach. His name was Zeno of Citium. And the place where he taught gave his philosophy its name. Stoicism. Picture that morning in Athens. The light comes in long, bright columns through the columns of the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch. The frescoes on the walls depict battle scenes, heroes, gods. Below them, ordinary people gather. A merchant with calloused hands. A soldier on his way somewhere. A young man with the look of someone who has recently lost everything. And Zeno, speaking in the clear, unhurried way of a man who has thought very hard about very difficult things. What was he saying? Something that sounded simple and turned out to be among the most radical ideas in human history. Your suffering, he taught, is not caused by what happens to you. It is caused by what you believe about what happens to you. That smell of fish and salt and smoke drifting through the marketplace, that is not misery. Misery is a judgment. Freedom is also a judgment. And between any event and your response to it, there is always a space. In that space lives your power. The world that needed this idea in 300 BCE is not so different from the world that needs it tonight. Zeno himself was a man shaped by loss. He was born around 334 BCE in Citium, on the island of Cyprus, a port city, a crossroads. A place where Phoenician merchants and Greek colonists and sailors from everywhere rubbed shoulders in the marketplace. His father was a merchant of Phoenician descent, and Zeno grew up surrounded by the rhythms of trade, the calculation of risk, the acceptance of uncertainty. The knowledge that the sea could give and take with equal indifference. He was not born a philosopher. He was born a businessman. And this, I think, matters enormously. Stoicism was not invented in a library. It was invented at the edge of the world, in the minds of people who understood that the wind does not care about your plans. The story of how Zeno came to philosophy is told differently by different ancient sources. But the most resonant version goes like this: he was sailing from Phoenicia to Piraeus with a cargo of purple dye, a luxury good, extraordinarily valuable, when his ship was wrecked. Everything was lost. He arrived in Athens with nothing. He wandered into a bookshop and picked up a copy of Xenophon's Memorabilia, a record of the life and teachings of Socrates. He read it standing there in the shop, and something changed in him. He looked up at the bookseller and asked, "Where can I find a man like this?" At that moment, the cynic philosopher Crates happened to be walking past the door. The bookseller pointed. "Follow him," he said. Zeno followed. And he never went back. He studied for years under Crates and other teachers. He absorbed everything. And eventually, he began to teach in his own voice, from his own understanding, at the Stoa Poikile. He taught there for the rest of his life. He was known for his personal austerity, his discipline, his consistency. The stories about him suggest a man who genuinely tried to live what he taught. Who ate simply, slept briefly, and wore the same threadbare coat in all weathers. Shipwreck had made him a philosopher. The loss of everything had shown him what remained. And what remained, he discovered, could never be taken. But Zeno's story, extraordinary as it is only the seed. The tree grew for another 5 centuries, tended by minds as different as the world itself could produce. And to understand Stoicism in its fullest human form, we must meet the people who lived it not just as theory, but as breath and bone and daily practice. Epictetus was born around 50 CE in Hierapolis, in what is now southwestern Turkey. His name, in Greek, simply means acquired, or gained, the name given to a slave, a thing that has been purchased. From his first breath, he was someone else's property. He was brought to Rome and became the slave of Epaphroditus, a wealthy freedman who served as a secretary to the Emperor Nero. The household of Epaphroditus was not a gentle place. The man was known for his temper and his willingness to use physical force against those who displeased him. The story most often told about Epictetus, the one I mentioned at the beginning of tonight's journey, involves his leg. The ancient sources are not entirely consistent, and some scholars debate the details. But the tradition that has come down to us says that Epaphroditus, in a moment of either cruelty or casual power testing, began to twist Epictetus's leg. And Epictetus said, "You will break it." Epaphroditus continued. The leg broke. Epictetus said, "Did I not tell you?" Whether this is literal history or philosophical legend, it tells us something essential about how people who knew Epictetus understood him. Here was a man who, even in the most extreme physical suffering, was somewhere beyond the reach of his oppressor. His master could break his body. He could not break whatever it was that Epictetus kept inside him. Epictetus eventually gained his freedom, how exactly is not certain, and began to teach in Rome. He attracted students from all levels of society, including young men from the Roman aristocracy. He was forced to leave Rome when the Emperor Domitian expelled all philosophers from the city. A move that tells you something about how seriously the Roman authorities took philosophical teaching. He settled in Nicopolis, in northwestern Greece, and taught there for the rest of his long life. He never wrote anything down. Everything we have from him comes through his student Arian, who sat in his classes and recorded what he heard. Those records became the Discourses and the Enchiridion, which translates roughly as the handbook, or the manual. The opening lines of the Enchiridion are possibly the most important sentences in the entire Stoic tradition. They are worth speaking slowly. Some things are in our control, and others are not. In our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, in a word, whatever is our own action. Not in our control are body, reputation, command, and in one word, whatever is not our own action. Read that again. Some things are in our control. Others are not. And the whole of Epictetus's philosophy is contained in learning deeply, practically, daily to know the difference. Now, across the decades, in a palace in Rome and then in a tent on the northern frontier of the empire, a man was reading these words. Marcus Aurelius was born in 121 CE into a family of Roman nobility. He was adopted by the Emperor Antoninus Pius as Antoninus himself had been adopted by Emperor Hadrian. In a chain of chosen succession that had produced an extraordinary run of capable, thoughtful rulers. Marcus never wanted to be emperor. By the accounts we have, he would have been perfectly happy to spend his life reading and writing and thinking. He had been drawn to philosophy from his earliest years, and had studied under some of the finest teachers in the empire. His correspondence with his rhetoric teacher Fronto is touching in its warmth. The young Marcus clearly loved and admired Fronto deeply. But Fronto was a teacher of words, of persuasion, of public performance. And Marcus found himself drawn to something else, the question of how to live. He discovered Stoicism through the discourses of Epictetus. And something in those words, the voice of a former slave. A man who had lost everything and found that nothing essential had been taken, spoke directly to something in Marcus. He carried Epictetus with him for the rest of his life. He became emperor in 161 CE, at the age of 40. And the world immediately handed him disasters to manage. Floods, plague, war on the eastern frontier, and then, more grinding and more lasting, war on the northern frontier along the Danube. He spent years in military camps that smelled of mud and iron and sick men. He presided over a plague that may have killed 5 million people across the empire. He buried a son. He managed betrayals and political machinations and the constant, crushing weight of being the person upon whom everything depended. And every night, or as close to every night as his circumstances permitted, he wrote in a private journal that he kept for no one but himself. He called it, in Greek, ta eis haton, literally, things to oneself. We call it the Meditations. It is a strange and beautiful book, because it is not a polished philosophical treatise. It is a man talking to himself, reminding himself of things he knows but keeps forgetting. catching himself in failures of patience or judgment. Returning, again and again, to the same core ideas. This is not in your control, let it go. You have done what you could. Begin again tomorrow. The most powerful emperor in the Western world, writing a bedtime note to himself about how to be a decent human being. And there is one more voice we need in this room tonight. Seneca. Lucius Annaeus Seneca was born around 4 BCE in Corduba, in what is now Spain, and came to Rome to make his career as a writer, orator, and politician. He was brilliant, the most gifted prose stylist of the Stoic tradition. The one whose letters you can read today and feel as though a man is sitting across the table from you, speaking directly and without pretense. He was also Stoicism's most complicated witness. He tutored the young Nero. He accumulated enormous wealth. He held political power at the highest levels of the most dangerous court in the world. And he wrote, with extraordinary lucidity, about the corrupting effects of wealth, the emptiness of ambition, and the importance of living simply and honestly. He was not unaware of the irony. He wrote about it. He said, memorably, "I am not yet a wise man, and I never may be. But I am moving in that direction." He said, "Do not judge my words by my life, for I am still a student of this philosophy, not its master." That honesty, that willingness to say, "I know what I should do, and I do not always do it. And I am trying," is part of what makes Seneca so enduringly readable. He is the Stoic philosopher you can actually relate to. He died in 65 CE, ordered to commit suicide by Nero the student who had grown into a tyrant. By the accounts that have come down to us, Seneca met his death with the composure that his philosophy had always demanded. He was 70 years old. He had lived long enough to see both the beauty and the limits of everything he believed. Zeno planted the seed. Epictetus grew the roots. Marcus Aurelius and Seneca bore the fruit. And now, 2,000 years later, we are still eating from that tree. Let us talk about what they actually taught. Because there is no more persistent misunderstanding about Stoicism than this, that it requires you to suppress your emotions. To be cold. To be hard. To pretend that loss and pain and grief do not exist. This is not Stoicism. This has never been Stoicism. What the Stoics actually said about emotion is at once more subtle and more demanding than simple repression. They drew a careful distinction between two kinds of emotional experience. The first kind, what they called path or irrational, runaway emotional reactions, the ones that sweep us away from reason and from our own values. Panic, consuming rage, obsessive grief, the kind of feeling that makes you do things you later cannot explain, that takes you away from who you want to be. The second kind, what they called eupathei or rational, appropriate emotional states that arise from correct judgment. Joy, rather than manic pleasure. Caution, rather than paralyzing fear. Wishing well to others, rather than desperate, hungry desire. These emotional states, the Stoics considered perfectly healthy. They are not something to be eliminated. They are something to be cultivated. The difference is not in the feeling itself. It is in what generates the feeling. Epictetus put it with characteristic directness: men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. The event is neutral. The earthquake does not mean anything. The harsh words spoken to you at work today do not carry an inherent meaning. We add the meaning. We attach the story. And then we suffer or don't suffer based on the story we have attached. Think about that for a moment. Think about something that upset you recently. Not a catastrophe, just an ordinary frustration. A driver who cut you off. A message that went unanswered. A plan that fell apart. Now ask yourself, what was the actual event? And what was the story you told yourself about it? In most cases, the actual event was quite small. The story was much larger. The story is where the suffering lives. This is not a comfortable idea. It can feel, at first, like it is blaming you for your own pain. If I am disturbed not by things but by my opinions about things, then is it my fault that I am suffering? The Stoics would say fault is not the right word. Responsibility is the right word. And there is a profound difference. Fault implies something fixed, something you should be ashamed of. Responsibility implies something you can act on. It implies agency. It implies freedom. Here is how Epictetus would put it: if you give someone else control over whether you are happy, if your peace of mind depends on what another person says or does, on whether events unfold as you hoped, then you have surrendered your freedom. You have handed the keys to your inner life to someone who does not care about your inner life. And you will spend the rest of your days waiting for them to give those keys back, which they will not do, because they do not even know they have them. The Stoic alternative is not to stop caring about things. It is to care about the right things, the things that are actually yours. Your intentions, your effort, your honesty, your response to whatever happens. These are yours. Nothing can take them. And building your sense of self around them, rather than around outcomes you cannot control, is what the Stoics meant by freedom. Marcus Aurelius returned to this idea throughout the Meditations, in dozens of different formulations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Or the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. That last line, the obstacle is the way, has become one of the most quoted sentences from Marcus Aurelius in the modern world. And what it means, in the Stoic framework, is this: when something blocks you. When something goes wrong, when the world refuses to cooperate with your plans, that very resistance is an invitation. It is asking you to find out who you are when things are not easy. It is asking you to practice. But how does one actually practice Stoicism? The ancient Stoics were not content with beautiful ideas. They were intensely practical. They developed specific techniques, what we might today call mental exercises, for training the mind in the direction of equanimity. The first, and perhaps most counterintuitive, is what Seneca and the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Before you begin your day, or before you embark on any significant undertaking, you deliberately imagine the worst that could happen. Your journey might be delayed. The meeting might go badly. You might be criticized or misunderstood. The project might fail. What would that look like? How would you handle it? This is not pessimism. Seneca insisted on this point. It is preparation. When you have already sat with the worst possibility and found that you can face it, that it will not destroy what is essential in you, then, when difficulty actually arrives, it does not arrive as a total surprise. It does not catch you without your footing. You have already been there, in imagination, and you already know the way through. Think of the last time something went worse than you expected. And think of the last time something went worse than you expected, but you had somehow, for whatever reason, already prepared yourself for that possibility. The difference in how you felt, how you responded, how quickly you found your equilibrium, that difference is the difference premeditatio malorum makes. The second practice is what we might call the view from above. When you are caught in the middle of a frustration, someone has said something cruel. A plan has collapsed, the day has gone sideways, the Stoics recommend lifting your perspective. Imagine the scene from a distance. Imagine it from very far away, as Marcus Aurelius described. Look at the whole sweep of history, the vast expanse of time. The countless generations of human beings who have lived and struggled and died and been forgotten. Your present difficulty, seen from that distance, becomes proportional. Not dismissed. Not trivialized, just proportional. Marcus wrote, how many great men of the past now lie forgotten. And how many will forget us? The empires built and lost and built again. The names that thundered across history, now unrecognizable except to scholars. He found this thought not depressing but clarifying. If all of this is temporary, all of it, the glory and the suffering and the ambition and the love, then what remains? Only what you did with the time you had. Only who you chose to be. The third practice is memento mori. Remember that you will die. This was not morbid for the Stoics. It was practical. Death is the one thing that comes for everyone without exception, the emperor and the slave. The philosopher and the barbarian at the gate, the young person who has never been sick a day in their life and the old person who has been waiting for it for years. Marcus wrote, Alexander the Great and his mule driver both ended up in the same place. The conqueror and the conquered returned to the same dust. Why remember this? Because death is the ultimate calibrator. When you hold your mortality in your mind, not obsessively, not anxiously, but steadily, the way you might hold a compass, everything else finds its proper size. The insult that seemed so large this morning shrinks. The grudge you have been carrying shrinks. The fear of what others might think of your choices shrinks. What matters is what you did with the time. And you still have some of it left. Perhaps quite a lot. Begin using it well. The fourth practice, quieter than the others, is simply attention. The Stoics were among the earliest practitioners of what we might now call mindfulness. Marcus Aurelius wrote about it in language that sounds remarkably contemporary. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. He is talking about the ability to step back from the noise of experience, to rest in the observing mind, rather than being carried away by the torrent of events and reactions. This retreat to the inner citadel, as the Stoics called it, is not withdrawal from life. It is the place from which you engage with life most effectively. It is the stillness at the center of the spinning world. Epictetus, who had every external reason to be frantic with anxiety, was described by those who knew him as remarkably calm. Not because he felt nothing, but because he had trained himself to return, again and again, to that inner place where his choices lived and where no one else's choices could reach him. Now we come to the place in the story where we must be honest about the fractures, the places where the philosophy and the life pulled apart from each other. Where the human beings who taught these ideas showed us their contradictions along with their wisdom. Seneca. We have to talk about Seneca. He wrote that wealth is a trap, that the pursuit of money creates a poverty of the soul, that the truly rich person wants only what he already has. He wrote this while managing one of the largest private fortunes in Rome. He lent money at ruinous rates of interest in the provinces of Britain. He accumulated properties and influence and political power in ways that would have made his own philosophy blush. He knew this. He said so, clearly and without self-pity, in his letters. He wrote, "I am not yet good. I have these principles and I struggle to live by them. I say this not to excuse myself but to tell you the truth. Because if I pretend to be further along than I am no longer useful to you as an example. I am only useful to you as a lie." There is something extraordinarily valuable in this admission. Seneca is not telling you that Stoicism makes you perfect. He is telling you that Stoicism gives you a direction. It is not a destination you reach. It is a way of walking. And some days you walk it better than other days. And then you begin again. Marcus Aurelius had his own fractures. The Meditations reveal a man at war with himself, constantly catching himself in failures of patience, of charity, of wisdom, and returning to correct his course. He writes, "I have been wronged." And then he immediately asks, "Have I, really? What is wrong, exactly? Who wronged me? And what do I actually know about why they did it?" He interrogates his own reactions with a relentlessness that would be exhausting if it were not so clearly genuine. He also, it must be said, made choices in his political life that sit uneasily alongside his philosophy. He persecuted Christians, though perhaps no more harshly than his predecessors. He passed increasingly restrictive legislation on gladiatorial combat but did not abolish it. He was, in the end, a man of his time and his world shaped by constraints he could not entirely see, let alone escape. And this is the deepest fracture in Stoicism, the question of what the philosophy demands from you. when the injustice is not inside your own head but outside in the world. Epictetus was a slave. Stoicism helped him survive, that helped him maintain an unbreachable interior dignity in the midst of an absolutely unjust external condition. But did it help him challenge the condition itself? Did it help him work to end slavery? The ancient Stoics believed that slavery was contrary to nature, that all human beings are equal in their capacity for reason and therefore in their fundamental dignity. They said this. They wrote it down. And yet slavery remained the foundational economic institution of the Roman world, and none of the major Stoic thinkers led any movement to abolish it. This is a real tension. And it is one that the philosophy has never entirely resolved. The inner citadel is real, and it is valuable. But the outer world is also real. And the question of how to engage with both, how to maintain your interior freedom, while also working to change conditions that make freedom impossible for others, that question goes on. The philosophy that Zeno taught at the Painted Porch has not stayed in the ancient world. It has moved through history with an almost uncanny persistence, showing up wherever human beings have faced the worst that life can deliver and needed to find a way to stand. In the 20th century, a naval officer named James Stockdale was shot down over Vietnam and spent 8 years as a prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton. He described the experience of that captivity, the torture, the isolation, the systematic attempt to break the minds and spirits of American POWs, and the thing he returned to again and again was Epictetus. He had read the Enchiridion at Stanford before he was deployed. He carried it in his mind through 8 years of captivity. He later wrote that Epictetus was the philosopher who saved his life. Some things are in your control. Others are not. That distinction, held firm under conditions of extreme duress, was his compass. In the consulting rooms of psychotherapists around the world, the Stoic tradition lives in a different form. Albert Ellis, one of the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy, cited Epictetus directly when developing his approach. The therapeutic insight at the heart of CBT, that our distress arises not from events, but from our interpretations of events, and that by changing our interpretations we can change our emotional experience, is Stoic philosophy translated into clinical language. The ancient Athenian marketplace has become the modern therapist's office. The idea is the same. Ryan Holiday's books, The Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy. The Daily Stoic have introduced Stoic ideas to millions of readers who would never pick up a philosophy text. Professional athletes, entrepreneurs, and military leaders have described Stoicism as the mental framework that grounds them in high-pressure situations. Tim Ferriss has called Marcus Aurelius's Meditations the book he has gifted most often to other people. The philosophy that was born in a shipwreck is still buoyant. But perhaps the most compelling argument for Stoicism's continued relevance is not found in books or therapy offices or sports psychology. It is found in the simple experience of reading Marcus Aurelius at 2 in the morning, when you cannot sleep because your mind will not stop churning. He wrote, nearly 2,000 years ago, you have power over your mind, not outside events. You have been born to work together. To oppose each other is against nature's law. Receive the suffering of the universe on the surface, and reflect it back from the deep. He wrote, it never helps to be resentful, but think of it differently. How is this a test of character? How could this be an opportunity? He wrote, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are this way because they cannot tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good, and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. We are made of the same atoms, drawn from the same source. He wrote these things in a tent on the Danube, surrounded by plague and war, responsible for the lives of millions, writing to himself, for himself, with no audience in mind and no posterity intended. And somehow, impossibly, those private notes in the dark have become the conversation he is still having with us, tonight, across all those years. So, let us sit with the question that Stoicism has always been asking. What is in your control right now, in this moment, as you listen to this? Your breath, your attention, the way you choose to think about the day that has just passed. The story you tell yourself about what happened, and why, and what it means for who you are. These are yours. They have always been yours. Nothing that happened today, nothing that anyone said or did, no news that arrived, no plan that fell apart can take them from you. What is not in your control? Almost everything else. The traffic, the weather, other people's opinions of you, the economy, the health of people you love, the mistakes you made 10 years ago. The future that has not yet arrived. All of this lies outside the citadel. All of this is beyond the fence that marks the boundary of your genuine power. The Stoics are not asking you to be indifferent to the things outside your control. They are asking you to be honest about them. To stop spending your precious inner resources on battles that cannot be won in the arena where you are fighting them. To bring those resources home, to the place where they can actually do something. You were upset today. Perhaps badly upset. The Stoics would not tell you that feeling was wrong. They would ask you what belief generated it. What story did you tell yourself? And is that story the only story available, or is there another interpretation? One that leaves you with more room to breathe? This is not a rhetorical question. I am asking you to actually try it, for just a moment, before you fall asleep tonight. Take the thing that weighs most heavily on you right now. Hold it gently, not gripping. And ask what part of this is truly mine to change. And what part of this have I been carrying that belongs to the wind? Epictetus lost his freedom. He did not lose himself. Marcus Aurelius carried an empire. He never stopped asking whether he was carrying it well. Seneca knew his own contradictions and chose to speak them rather than hide them. Zeno lost everything to the sea and found, in the loss, the thing the sea could not take. These are not superhuman stories. These are human stories. About the practice imperfect, daily, ongoing of choosing where to put your weight. About the discovery that your interior world, however battered by the exterior one, has a kind of bedrock that holds. The Stoics called it the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the part of you that observes and judges and chooses. We might call it the self. It is the part of you that was watching, even today, as the day unfolded. It saw everything that happened. It felt everything that was felt. And right now, it is listening to this voice, in the dark, before sleep. That part of you has been here all along. The Stoics just kept pointing at it and saying that's where you live. Not in your reputation. Not in your bank account. Not in anyone else's opinion of you. Not in the outcome of anything that is not already decided. Here. This. The quiet witness behind the noise. Rest now. You have done what you could today. Tomorrow you begin again. On our next journey, we travel east to a very different kind of wisdom. If the Stoics taught us about holding firm, the ancient Chinese philosophers of the Taoist tradition taught something almost opposite about letting go, about flowing, about the strange power of not doing. Laozi, who may or may not have been a single person, may or may not have written a text of only 5,000 characters that has nonetheless shaped a civilization. Zhuangzi, who dreamed he was a butterfly and then wondered if he was a butterfly dreaming he was a man. These voices have been waiting a very long time to speak to us. If tonight's journey moved you, if Epictetus's quiet endurance or Marcus Aurelius's midnight honesty touched something in you, I hope you will subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me, what is the thing you have been trying to control that perhaps does not belong to you? What is the thing you have been carrying that you could set down? These are the questions philosophy is for. Not to answer for us. To give us the courage to ask them ourselves. Sleep well. The morning will ask its own questions. For now, rest.